What would you risk to save the life of someone who hates you for being you? Imagine a flashing ambulance cutting through a rainy night, a life hanging by a thread, and one steady pair of hands between breath and silence. Now imagine that same life belongs to a woman whose first words, awake and furious, are not, "thank you," but venom aimed at the color of those hands. How do you keep doing the job when gratitude turns to hate the moment the patient blinks? How do you stand tall when the world expects you to shrink? This is about a black doctor who risked everything, his reputation, his peace, even his sense of belonging, to walk into chaos and pull someone back from the edge, a patient who refuses to see the humanity that saved her, and about the slow-burning fallout that turns St. Augustine's Hospital ward into a courtroom of public opinion. But it's not just anger and triumph. There's a twist waiting that will make you question exactly who's really entitled to forgiveness, and who's been hiding from their own mirror all along. If you're the kind of person who loves stories that make you uncomfortable, think deeply, and feel everything all at once, then hit that subscribe button and stay with me till the very end. Because in this story, the real twist isn't who gets saved, it's who finally learns to see. But before we dive into the chaos of those first desperate hours inside the hospital, I want to hear from you. When was the last time you owed someone a debt you didn't want to admit? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your answer might just change how you see everything that happens next. The sirens tore through the rain like a desperate cry, echoing off the concrete and glass of downtown Atlanta. The ambulance skidded to a halt under the harsh white glow of the emergency bay lights, water splashing across the asphalt. Paramedics rushed to the back, throwing the doors open. 58-year-old female, one of them shouted over the storm. Collapsed at home, severe chest pains, loss of consciousness on arrival. Vitals unstable. Possible cardiac arrest. Inside the hospital, Dr. Michael Carter was already pulling on his gloves. A trauma surgeon with the calm eyes of a man who'd seen everything, and still cared anyway, he moved with the deliberate speed that only experience could teach. The kind of speed that saves lives without wasting motion. "Bring her in," he barked, his voice cutting clean through the chaos. The gurney burst through the doors. Rainwater dripped from the paramedics' jackets as they rolled the patient into the trauma bay. Her face was pale, twisted in pain, strands of silver hair sticking to her forehead. "Name?" Dr. Carter asked, leaning in as the nurse connected the ECG. "Margaret Whitmore," the paramedic replied. "No allergies on record. Found unresponsive by a neighbor." The monitor came alive with erratic blips. A jagged heartbeat. Then a flatline. "Code blue." The words shattered the air. Michael's voice shifted from calm to command mode. "Epinephrine, now. Start compressions." The team moved like a machine, each member in perfect sync. Michael's hands pressed rhythmically against Margaret's chest. Every push, every breath, was a battle between science and inevitability. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. "Come on," Michael muttered under his breath, sweat mixing with the rain still on his brow. "Not tonight. Stay with me." The monitor flickered, a faint pulse. "But she's back," a nurse shouted. Michael exhaled, his hands trembling just slightly before he steadied them. He'd done this 1,000 times, but the gravity of it never faded. "Let's get her 2 or 3. Prep for emergency angioplasty. We're not out of the woods yet." As the nurses wheeled Margaret down the hallway, Michael stripped off his gloves and followed, already mentally mapping out the surgery. He didn't know anything about her beyond the data flashing on the screen, age, weight, condition, but that didn't matter. Every patient was a life. Every life was worth the fight. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Margaret Whitmore was one of the city's most outspoken voices in a far-right activist group that had recently made headlines for its racist campaigns against minority professionals. She had even given a televised interview just months ago, railing about how standards in medicine were dropping because diversity hires were being prioritized over qualified candidates. And tonight, the life in her hands, the life that would soon owe everything to one man, belonged to a black doctor. The operating room was bright, sterile, alive with motion. Michael scrubbed in quickly, reviewing the scans on the monitor. The blockage was severe. a coronary artery almost completely closed. "She's lucky she made it here in time," said Nurse Alvarez, her voice low but steady as she handed him the catheter. Michael nodded. "Luck had nothing to do with it. Let's keep her that way." For the next 3 hours, every breath, every heartbeat, every whispered command existed in perfect focus. The storm outside raged on, lightning flashing like the pulse of a world holding its breath. Finally, the final suture was placed. Michael looked up at the monitor, steady rhythm. She was going to live. He stepped back, peeled off his gloves, and looked down at Margaret's still form. "You're safe now," he said quietly, mostly to himself. Hours later, in the ICU, the lights dimmed to a soft glow. Machines hummed softly, steady and reassuring. Margaret Whitmore stirred, groaning as her eyes fluttered open. Her vision blurred, then focused on the ceiling above her. A voice came from the side of the bed. "Gentle. Mrs. Whitmore? You're in St. Augustine Hospital. You had a cardiac episode, but the surgery went well. You're stable now." Her gaze shifted slowly, and froze. Standing beside her was Dr. Michael Carter, his dark skin framed by the faint halo of monitor light, his ID badge gleaming faintly. Her lips parted. Her expression changed from confusion, to disbelief, to fury. "You?" she rasped, her throat dry. "You're the doctor?" "Yes, ma'am," Michael said, his tone even. "I performed your surgery. You're going to be okay." Her face twisted. "You expect me to believe that? That you cut me open?" Michael blinked, the faintest crease forming between his brows. "I assure you, Mrs. Whitmore, the procedure was successful. You're recovering well." Her heart rate monitor spiked. "Get me another doctor. I want someone qualified." "Someone?" She hesitated, her lips curling. "Who knows what they're doing?" The nurse beside her froze. Michael kept his tone neutral, years of composure kicking in. "I understand you're disoriented, but your care is being handled properly. If you'd like a second opinion, I can request a colleague." "I don't need your charity," she hissed, turning her face away. "I didn't come here to be some experiment." The words stung, though Michael didn't show it. He'd heard them before, in different forms, from different mouths. But somehow, after spending 3 hours fighting to keep her heart beating, they hit differently. He nodded once, quietly. "Rest now, Mrs. Whitmore. The nurses will check on you shortly." He turned to leave, his steps slow, deliberate, almost too controlled. In the hallway, the weight of the encounter sank in. Nurse Alvarez caught up to him, her eyes full of sympathy. "She doesn't know what she's saying," she offered. Michael gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe, but she meant every word." He leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. The sound of rain still whispered against the windows, as if the storm hadn't left with the sunrise. For a man like Michael, this wasn't new. The subtle racism, the blatant kind, the questions about whether he was really the doctor. But something about this case, this woman, felt heavier. Maybe it was because he'd nearly lost her. Maybe because he knew she'd never see him as the man who saved her, only the man she couldn't stand to owe. But what he didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that this story was far from over. Because while Margaret's hatred was loud and open, someone else's silence in that hospital would soon be far more dangerous. And in less than a week, Dr. Michael Carter wouldn't just be defending his integrity, he'd be fighting for his entire career. Margaret lay in her hospital bed that night, replaying everything the nurse had told her. She couldn't stand it, the idea that a black man had saved her life. Her thoughts twisted in on themselves, anger feeding on humiliation. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers. Within minutes, she was typing an email, a complaint, to the hospital's administration. Her words were sharp, calculated, and venomous. "This so-called doctor endangered me. I want him investigated." As she hit send, a thunderclap rolled across the city. And in that single moment, the storm outside the hospital walls was nothing compared to the one about to break within them. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of St. Augustine Hospital, but for Dr. Michael Carter, it might as well have been another storm. The light didn't touch him, it only revealed how little sleep he'd gotten. He sat at his desk in the surgeon's lounge, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. His mind wasn't on his next surgery, or his rounds, it was on Margaret Whitmore. Her words from the previous night replayed like a needle scratching an old record. You people always think you can get away with anything. He'd heard it before. But this time, it was different. Because this time, she had his name. At 8:45 a.m., a knock sounded on his office door. He looked up to see Dr. Lauren Fields, the hospital's chief administrator, standing there with a manila folder clutched to her chest. Her expression was tight, sympathetic, but cautious. That was never a good sign. "Michael, do you have a minute?" He nodded slowly, setting the coffee aside. "Of course." She stepped in, closed the door behind her, and sat across from him. The sound of the door latching echoed in the still room. "I wish this were just a routine check-in," she began, sliding the folder across the desk. "But we received a formal complaint last night. About you." Michael didn't reach for it right away. He didn't need to. He already knew. "Margaret Whitmore?" Lauren sighed, confirming it with a nod. "Yes." She filed it directly with administration. Claims of improper conduct, malpractice, and emotional distress. She paused before adding carefully, "She's also alleging that you acted unprofessionally because of, quote, personal resentment toward her." Michael's jaw flexed. "Resentment?" Lauren's voice softened. "I know. It's absurd. The surgery was flawless. But her tone in the complaint is harsh. She's threatening legal action and claiming she was treated differently because of her." He finished the sentence for her, his tone flat. "Because of her race." Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. "She's already contacted a lawyer. We'll handle it, but I wanted to give you a heads up before it escalates." Michael leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow, steady breath. "So this is happening again." Lauren frowned. "Again?" He gave a humorless smile. "Different name, same playbook. I save a life, and somehow I end up defending my right to do it." There was a silence that stretched long and heavy. Finally, Lauren said quietly, "We'll review the surgical logs and witness statements. But you know how this works. Once she's gone public, it becomes about perception, not proof." Michael nodded. He knew all too well. Across the city, Margaret Whitmore sat upright in her pristine white bedroom, a phone pressed to her ear. Her lawyer's voice crackled through the line. "I've filed the preliminary complaint with the hospital's legal department," he said. "But if you're serious about this, we'll need to make it public. It's the only way they'll feel pressure to act." Margaret's reflection glared back at her in the vanity mirror, makeup perfectly applied, expression cold as glass. "Oh, I'm serious," she said. "He humiliated me. He touched me without consent. I want people to know exactly what kind of hospital they're running." Her lawyer hesitated. "Margaret, from the medical reports, it looks like the surgery was successful." "I don't care what the reports say," she snapped. "I felt pain. He must have done something wrong." And then, softer, almost whispering to herself, "He had no right to touch me." There was a long pause on the line before the lawyer spoke again. "All right, I'll move forward." As the call ended, Margaret stared at her own reflection. Her lips trembled. The truth was more complicated than she wanted to admit. When she woke up in that hospital bed and saw him standing there, something inside her had snapped. Not just anger, fear. Because somewhere deep down, she'd remembered another face. A face from her past. And that face was black too. Back at St. Augustine, the tension was spreading like smoke. Nurses whispered in break rooms, and even the janitors had heard the rumors. "That's the woman who's suing Dr. Carter," they said. "The racist one. Nah, maybe he did something. You never know." The truth, as always, got lost in the noise. Michael moved through it like a ghost. Calm on the surface, storm beneath. He continued his rounds, greeted patients, gave updates to families, the same steady doctor everyone trusted. But inside, he was bracing for impact. During lunch, Greg Stanton, the hospital's head of security and one of Michael's closest friends, found him sitting alone in the cafeteria. "I heard about Whitmore," Greg said, sitting down with a heavy sigh. "Man, you've got to be kidding me." After all that work you did. Michael stirred his coffee but didn't look up. Some people would rather destroy you than thank you. Greg leaned forward. They won't let this stick. You've got witnesses, records? Michael cut him off with a small shake of his head. You don't understand, Greg. People don't remember facts. They remember feelings. Once the story's out there, the headline, Black Doctor Accused of Malpractice, the truth won't matter. Greg clenched his jaw. Then make them remember the truth. Michael's eyes lifted slowly, calm but burning. I intend to. 2 days later, the hospital's legal team summoned Michael to a preliminary hearing, an internal review before the lawsuit officially reached the courts. As he walked down the corridor toward the conference room, the air felt colder, heavier. He could feel eyes on him, some supportive, some doubtful. He had become a symbol again, whether he wanted it or not. Inside the room sat 3 people, Lauren Fields, an HR representative, and the hospital's attorney, Elaine Porter. They stood as he entered, offering polite but tense nods. Dr. Carter, Elaine began, thank you for coming on short notice. As you know, this is a confidential proceeding. Ms. Whitmore's attorney has filed an official notice of intent to sue for medical negligence and racial discrimination. Michael folded his hands, his voice steady. You have my surgical report. The procedure was by the book. I saved her life. Elaine nodded. We know. But she's claiming the complications she's feeling now, pain, fatigue, are due to improper care. She's saying you intentionally neglected her post-op because of bias. He blinked. Intentional neglect? He gave a small, incredulous laugh. She's alive because I didn't give up on her. Lauren interjected, her voice soft. Michael, we believe you. But we have to handle this carefully. She's already contacted the press. Michael's heart sank. Of course she has. Elaine slid a printed sheet across the table. It was a headline from an online article. Local woman accuses surgeon of racial bias and negligence, claims hospital ignoring her pain. Beneath it, a photo of Margaret. And beside her, a stock photo of a black man in scrubs, not Michael, but close enough for readers to assume. Michael stared at it for a long moment. So it begins. That night, he sat alone in his office, the city lights glowing beyond the window. He thought of his father, a doctor before him, a man who once said, "You'll have to be twice as good to get half the respect, son." And sometimes, even that won't be enough. He was beginning to understand exactly what that meant. But this time, the storm wasn't just coming for him. It was about to tear apart the illusion of peace that everyone in that hospital clung to. Because while the lawsuit raged in the public eye, someone inside St. Augustine was feeding information to the press. Someone with a motive. And Michael was about to discover that not all enemies hide outside the room. The hospital halls had grown quieter, but not calmer. The air carried whispers, not the kind that drifted away, but the kind that lingered and multiplied. By the 3rd week of the investigation, Dr. Michael Carter had become both invisible and unavoidable. Colleagues still greeted him with polite smiles, but behind every look was a flicker of curiosity, or worse, doubt. He'd been through long nights before, nights when lives balanced on the edge of a heartbeat, but this was different. This wasn't medicine. This was survival. And in the middle of it all, he could feel something shifting inside the hospital. Like a current, quiet but dangerous, pulling at his foundation. It started small, a missing report here, a delayed email there. Michael thought it was clerical at first, until one morning he opened his locker in the staff lounge and found a copy of the Atlanta Sentinel folded neatly inside. The headline hit him like a punch to the chest. New evidence surfaces in case against black surgeon. Internal sources suggest pattern of negligence. He froze. Internal sources. That meant someone inside St. Augustine Hospital was leaking information. And not just facts, distorted details meant to erode his credibility. He stared at the article, reading each line with a slow, burning calm. Anonymous staff members have described Dr. Carter as dismissive and unwilling to listen to patient concerns. His hands clenched the paper. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to ruin his case. They were trying to erase his name. Later that morning, he stormed into Dr. Lauren Field's office, holding the paper. "Who's talking to the press?" Lauren looked up, startled. "Michael, I saw the article this morning." "Don't play dumb, Lauren. Someone inside this hospital is feeding them lies." She exhaled, setting her pen down. "You're right. I've been trying to find out who, but whoever it is, they're covering their tracks." The article quoted surgical records that weren't part of the public file. That means it's someone with admin access. Michael's mind was already racing. That narrows it down. Lauren nodded grimly. "And there's more. The hospital's board is getting nervous. They've called for a formal ethics review." Michael stared at her. "An ethics review? Over an accusation that hasn't even gone to court yet?" "It's precautionary," Lauren said, but her tone betrayed the truth. It wasn't precautionary. It was fear. The board was trying to protect itself. Michael sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "So, what happens now?" "They'll question everyone you've worked with in the last 6 months," Lauren said softly. "Including your team." His team. His nurses. His colleagues. People he trusted. And somewhere among them, a traitor. That evening, Michael found himself sitting in the dim light of the staff break room. The coffee machine hummed softly, filling the silence. Nurse Olivia Alvarez, the same nurse who'd assisted during Margaret's surgery, walked in, hesitating at the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Michael nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I heard about the ethics review," she said quietly. "They called me in this afternoon." He looked up sharply. "And?" She swallowed. "They asked about your attitude during surgery. If you'd said anything inappropriate." Michael frowned. "Inappropriate?" "Yeah. Like if you'd made any personal comments about Mrs. Whitmore." He let out a low, bitter laugh. "You mean did I offend her before I saved her life?" Olivia winced. "I told them the truth, Dr. Carter. That you were professional, that you did everything right. But... She hesitated. "They said someone else had already testified that you were agitated during the operation. That you snapped at staff. They made it sound like you lost control." Michael's chest tightened. "Who said that?" "I don't know," Olivia whispered. "They wouldn't tell me. But I could tell. They already had someone's statement." Michael leaned back, stunned into silence. He'd been calm. Controlled. Focused. Every second of that surgery had been textbook. He knew it, everyone in that room did. But if someone inside the OR had turned on him, this was more than betrayal. This was sabotage. Across town, in a quiet suburban home filled with porcelain figurines and framed family photos, Margaret Whitmore sat on her couch, staring at a thick envelope her lawyer had just delivered. Inside were updates from her legal team, including the same article Michael had read that morning. She smiled faintly. "Good," she whispered. "It's working." But the smile faded as her eyes drifted to one photo near her fireplace, an old picture, worn around the edges. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, holding hands with a man in a doctor's coat. A black man. Her father's best friend. She stared at it for a long moment, her throat tightening. Then she turned the picture face down. 2 days later, Michael sat in front of the hospital's internal review board. The room was too bright, too sterile. It smelled like disinfectant and judgment. 3 panelists sat across from him, their expressions unreadable. "Dr. Carter," one began, "we've received multiple statements about your conduct during the operation on Mrs. Whitmore." Michael met their gaze steadily. "Conduct? I saved her life." "Yes," another panelist said. "But several reports describe you as visibly frustrated and verbally short with staff. One nurse claimed you disregarded her input during a complication." Michael's pulse spiked. "There was no complication. The surgery went smoothly. Every action I took was documented." The first panelist adjusted his glasses. "Nevertheless, the perception among some of your colleagues is concerning." Perception. There it was again. The word that destroyed truth. He leaned forward. "If you're going to judge me by perception, then at least ask yourselves why those perceptions exist. Because the patient who filed the complaint made it clear, she doesn't see me as a doctor. She sees me as a problem." The panelists shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter, we understand this is stressful. But this is not about race." Michael's voice cut through, firm but quiet. "It always is." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. That night, back in his office, Michael sat staring at the city lights again. Those same indifferent stars behind the skyline. His phone buzzed. A message from Greg Stanton. "Need to see you. Urgent. Don't trust anyone." Michael frowned, grabbing his coat. 10 minutes later, he found Greg waiting in the parking lot beside his security SUV, his face grave. "I found out who's been leaking to the press," Greg said, his voice low. "And it's someone close." Michael's stomach dropped. "Who?" Greg hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want to believe it, man. But it's someone from your own team. Someone who was in the OR that night." Michael stared at him. "Who, Greg?" Greg swallowed. "Olivia." For a second, Michael couldn't breathe. His mind flashed through every moment. Her calm voice in the OR, her empathy afterward, her soft reassurances. "She gave a statement to the board," Greg continued. "Said you were aggressive during the surgery. She's the anonymous source." Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" Greg shook his head. "I don't know. But I think someone's paying her." Michael stood there in the parking lot, rain starting to fall again, his coat clinging to his shoulders. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was war. And somewhere in that storm, beneath the lies, the hate, and the headlines, a truth was waiting to be revealed. A truth that would not only clear his name, but shatter Margaret Whitmore's entire world. Rain lashed against the hospital windows like nature itself was restless. The city outside buzzed in oblivion, unaware that inside St. Augustine, one man's career, and another's conscience, were seconds away from collision. Dr. Michael Carter stood in his office, soaked from the downpour, staring blankly at the floor. His mind was a storm of its own. Olivia. Of all people. He'd mentored her. Trusted her. She'd been in that operating room with him, steady and loyal, or so he thought. Now she was the reason the media had turned his name into a headline soaked in suspicion. A knock broke his thoughts. He turned slowly. Greg Stanton stepped inside, rain dripping from his jacket. "You were right," Greg said quietly. "I checked her bank activity. She's been getting deposits, untraceable cash, but consistent. Started right after the lawsuit." Michael's jaw tightened. "So someone's paying her to lie." Greg nodded grimly. "And I think I know who." 2 hours later, the two men stood in front of a modest two-story house on the city's east side. The porch light flickered in the rain. Greg held up a manila folder, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure you want to see this?" he asked. Michael didn't hesitate. "Show me." Greg opened the folder. Inside were two photos, one of Olivia Alvarez, the nurse who had betrayed him, and the other, Margaret Whitmore. They were standing side by side, smiling. The caption beneath the photo, "Community Outreach Event, St. Mark's Lutheran Church, 2012. Michael stared at it in disbelief. They knew each other. Greg nodded. Neighbors. According to public records, they lived on the same street for nearly 10 years. Olivia volunteered at the church where Margaret was a member. My guess? Margaret approached her after the surgery, offered money, maybe threatened her. But there's something else. He flipped to another page. A birth certificate. Michael read the name once, then again. Father, Thomas Whitmore. Mother, Elena Alvarez. His eyes shot up. You're saying? Greg nodded slowly. Olivia is Margaret's daughter. The room spun. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was blood deep. Greg's voice was low but steady. She's been working here under her mother's maiden name for years. No one connected them. Margaret must have reached out when this all started. It explains the leaks, the testimony, everything. Michael pressed his palms against the desk, trying to steady his thoughts. So all this, the lawsuit, the smear campaign, it wasn't about the surgery. It was about revenge. Greg exhaled. But revenge for what? And that was the question that would turn everything upside down. The next morning, Michael walked into the hospital with a calmness that felt dangerous. He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. He called for a private meeting with Dr. Lauren Fields and the hospital's attorney, Elaine Porter. Both women looked weary, but when they saw the file in his hand, their posture straightened. "I have proof," Michael said, setting the documents on the table. "Proof that Margaret Whitmore and nurse Olivia Alvarez are mother and daughter. And proof that Olivia's been receiving payments since the lawsuit began." Elaine's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Positive," Michael said. "Check the transactions, the addresses, the volunteer records. She's been playing both sides from the start, leaking information to frame me and feeding her mother's lawyers inside details from the hospital." Lauren's face hardened. "If this is true." "It is," Michael cut in, voice cold as glass. "And I want this on record." Hours later, the hospital's legal department confirmed everything. Olivia Alvarez had resigned abruptly after being summoned for questioning, leaving behind her ID badge and a single typed note. "I'm sorry. She's my mother. She made me choose." The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses whispered. Doctors shook their heads. By noon, the story had broken publicly. Whistleblower in hospital lawsuit exposed as plaintiff's daughter. And by evening, the lawsuit that had threatened to destroy Michael's career was collapsing under its own lies. But the story wasn't over. Because Margaret Whitmore wasn't done fighting. The next day, she arrived at the hospital unannounced, storming through the lobby with cameras trailing behind her. Her face was pale, but her voice, sharp and unyielding. "I demand to speak with Dr. Carter," she shouted. "He's lying. They're all lying." Security moved in, but before they could intervene, Michael himself appeared at the top of the stairs, his lab coat gleaming under the sterile lights. The room fell silent. Reporters turned their cameras. The predator and the prey finally face to face. He descended slowly, each step measured. "You wanted to speak to me, Mrs. Whitmore?" Her fury cracked. "You destroyed my family." Michael's eyes narrowed. "No, Margaret. You did that yourself." The crowd murmured. He continued, his voice even but carrying weight. "Your daughter lied for you. Risked her career. For what? To protect a mother who couldn't admit that the only thing she couldn't survive was being saved by a black man." Margaret's lip trembled. "You don't know anything about me." Michael took a step closer. "I know you taught your daughter that hate was love. I know you turned her into your weapon. And I know the one thing you can't stand isn't me, it's the truth." She froze, her breath catching. The cameras clicked. The moment was raw, the kind that lived forever online. Then, in a whisper that cut through the chaos, Margaret said, "You're just like him." Michael frowned. "Like who?" Her voice cracked. "My father." The room went still. She looked away, trembling. "He left my mother for a woman like you. He ruined our family. I swore I'd never let someone like you win again." Michael stood motionless. For the first time, he saw the brokenness behind her hate, the wound she'd been carrying her entire life. It didn't excuse it, but it explained it. He took a slow breath. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly, "hate is a poison you keep drinking, hoping someone else will die." Her face crumpled. The fight drained from her eyes. Security gently guided her away as cameras flashed and questions flew. 3 weeks later, the court dismissed the case entirely. The judge's words were clear. There is no evidence of misconduct. The accusations were fabricated, and the plaintiff acted with malicious intent. Justice was served. But Michael didn't celebrate. He sat in his office that night, watching the rain again, feeling the familiar ache of exhaustion. Greg entered quietly. "You did it, man. It's over." Michael smiled faintly. "Yeah. But somehow it doesn't feel like victory." Greg nodded. "Maybe because it never was about winning. It was about surviving." Michael leaned back. "Funny thing about survival, sometimes it teaches you more about others than you ever wanted to know." Greg chuckled. "You're not wrong." He paused, then added quietly, "What'll you do now?" Michael turned toward the window, the reflection of the city lights flickering in his eyes. "Keep doing what I've always done. Show up. Do the work. Save whoever walks through those doors. whether they'd save me or not. Greg smiled. You're a better man than most. Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because somewhere deep down, he understood something that Margaret Whitmore never would. That sometimes the only real justice is becoming the person your enemies swore you could never be. Months later, a handwritten letter arrived at Michael's office. The return address was a correctional facility in Georgia. It was from Olivia Alvarez. Dr. Carter, I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know. I told the court everything. About my mother, the payments, the lies. I couldn't live with it anymore. You saved her life. And in a way, you saved mine too. I just didn't see it until it was too late. Thank you. Michael folded the letter quietly, tucking it into his drawer. He didn't reply. Outside, the city stretched wide and restless, broken, but still beautiful. He put on his white coat, straightened his badge, and walked back toward the trauma wing. Another life was waiting. Another fight was about to begin. And this time, he didn't need the world's approval to keep saving it. Some battles are fought with scalpels. Others with silence. But the hardest ones, the ones that define us, are fought with grace. Dr. Michael Carter didn't just win his case. He proved that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. If this story moved you, if it made you think, hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, do you believe people like Margaret Whitmore can truly change? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? Because in the end, what we choose to see in others says everything about who we really are.